To go. All right, are there any questions right now about corporate owned insurance? Good stuff, Melanie, I like it. Okay, I've previously referenced this book, but if you find this stuff at all interesting, if you think this is something I'd like to be doing more of, the first book to pick up, nice. The first book to pick up is Glenn Stevens' book, Estate Planning with Life Insurance. Okay, and it's about 120 bucks or something like that. Currently on 7th edition. Okay, it's very good. It's actually readable. You would never guess that Glenn is a tax lawyer from reading it. About 120 bucks and well worth it. Okay, and if you have a lawyer that you regularly work with, okay, if you have a lawyer in your life somewhere who does your corporate documents for your clients or something like that, buy a copy for that lawyer too. It will pay off. Good. It's so very good. Now, if you really want to nerd out on it, yeah, you could. I know you have an accountant you regularly work with. The accountant would probably appreciate it too. But what Glenn does a lot more, he's a lawyer himself, right? So what he does a lot more work on here is the contents of a will and the contents of a buy-sell. So when you read through that book, following that, you will be able to tear apart, let's say, wills that were casually done or buy-sells that were done by dabblers. Okay, good. He has specific cases in there. He has the language you would use in the actual documents. He has the why this is good language and why this is bad language. It's really, in terms of an execution, like actually being able to take that book and turn it into execution, it's fantastic. It's second to none that way. Okay, so maybe your accountant, Melanie, nobody's going to hate the book. It's so good. You could just buy it for like your mom for Christmas or whatever. She will like it too. Good? No? All right. So what? All right. And then the other book that's a little more hardcore is Canadian Taxation of Life Insurance by Florence Marino. And she usually has a co-author on it. It changes every year. Okay, and it's currently on its 9th edition, 10th edition. Okay, but it's pretty hardcore. Okay. So, nice. No, he definitely writes it himself, Bonnie. If you ever see Glenn present, you'll see this. He's really very personable. He's a good storyteller. Yeah, he's like an insurance agent trapped in a tax lawyer's body. Okay, and then Canadian Taxation of Life Insurance. Also, it's good. You really have to be prepared though for a read here. Okay. Yeah, you can get them both from Indigo. You can, if you have, for those that are independent, if you have a Manulife rep, because Florence is at Manulife, you can actually get that book. If you're a Manulife producer, you can get that book paid for out of your Manulife reps M&A budget. Okay. You don't need to, Stephen. Honestly, I wouldn't, except that I need them for a course that I teach. Well, maybe I don't know, whatever. Let's say that I wouldn't, just for the sake of argument. Okay. But yeah, I do get new copies every year. But no, I would suggest that as a casual read, you don't need to replace them every time a new edition comes out. Okay, anyways, that's my plug for two excellent books. All right. Okay, so the next then we'll look at is just the basics of leveraged life insurance. Okay, so the idea here, it doesn't matter whether we own insurance personally or corporately, but let's say that I have a policy, okay, any policy with a cash surrender value. So I can borrow using this cash surrender value. There's really two ways that I can do this. I can take out a policy loan, and that's from the insurer. And that's what we talked about before, that policy loan from the insurer. That's tax-free up to ACB, and then taxable beyond that. There's no credit adjudication here. Okay, so the insurer doesn't do any credit adjudication, and I can capitalize my interests and really just let that thing roll. Okay, I don't have to service the debt. All right, so it's not a conventional loan in that case, and it also does not help with my credit underwrite or my credit score or anything like that. If I pay it, it won't report well on my credit score. Or I can collateralize my cash surrender value. And here you're dealing with a third-party lender. Now, it might be a lender who's linked to the insurer. Some lenders have that, but a lot of times it's a completely separate lender. So for example, some life insurers will have a specific agreement with TD. Some will have a specific agreement with Scotia. Some will have a specific agreement with Manulife, okay, Manulife Bank. It just depends what insurer you're dealing with. National Bank, a lot of you on the call would have National Bank Financial as your lender of choice. That's good. So we're dealing here with a third-party lender. Oh, Equitable Bank. Equitable Bank is doing a bunch of this kind of stuff now too. Okay, all good? And now I'm going to borrow based on the cash surrender value of the policy. This time it will be adjudicated based on my overall creditworthiness. And here, you may be allowed, some lenders will allow you to capitalize the interests. That's going to be lender specific. That's not generally the case. Now, I will point out that on policy loans from the insurer, the interest rate here varies quite a bit. I see loans here typically between 4 and 8%. Okay. Does anybody see one lower than that today? Anybody know that their policy loan rate is less than 4%? You don't even need to pay the interest, Shauna. You could capitalize the whole thing. Okay. Now, the interest will be paid eventually, right? The interest will be paid when you die, because then the insurer will just take the total amount of the loan and come and take that off the death benefit, right? And that's going to be true in both of these cases. Yeah, it is compounded, Bev. Absolutely, it's compounded. Yeah. So then your interest rate here is typically prime or thereabouts. Okay, in that vicinity of prime. All right. Good. And yeah, to your comment, Shauna, with both of these, what's going to happen is at death, we'll take the outstanding amount of the loan plus any capitalized interest. And that pays off the loan first. And then what's left goes to your beneficiaries. Okay, now the amount that an insurer will lend you varies based on the type of policy. Now this does vary quite a bit from case to case, but typically what you'll see is that you can borrow somewhere around 75 to 90% of the cash surrender value with whole life insurance, okay, and somewhere around 40 to 75% of the cash surrender value with UL. And that's going to be lender specific, and that's also going to depend on the types of investments you have. So if you have a UL policy that's sitting all in guaranteed investments, then you typically can borrow a little bit more. Okay, that's all good? Okay. So a very common retirement strategy that we see sold today is that, yeah, and I find most so it is highly dependent on the circumstances, Bonnie, and I'm going to show you a giant exception to that on the next slide. But yeah, that's and it does make sense, doesn't it? That we give a little bit more. Right, and it depends what you're trying to do here, Bonnie, right? It depends what you're trying to do with that policy. You're probably not. Yeah, exactly. You're probably not buying GICs in the early days because you're right. You're not going to get enough growth to keep the thing funded. So you really have a trade-off to make there. You're not building the policy to maximize how much you can borrow here typically, right? You're building the policy to have insurance that works. Okay. So a very common type of retirement strategy here is that we're going to use some sort of optimizer or maximizer or minimizer. And I love the different names for these things. Okay, and usually it's UL. And the idea here is that we're going to have a death benefit. So your face amount of the policy is going to start off quite high because it builds the most MTAR room. And then we're going to drop that MTAR off. Sorry, drop that face amount off. So this allows lots of funding back here. And then we're going to reduce that face amount because as we reduce the face amount, it keeps your cost of insurance low. So you're not spending a lot of money to maintain that insurance. What was the last example before the break? Didn't we do transfers of life insurance before the break? I don't remember, Todd.
No, remember you said that you need to set up one share.
Okay, so here I don't have a corporation here, or I may or may not have a corporation. It doesn't matter, right? I'm not dealing with a corporate scenario. This is just any time that we're using insurance. Okay. So this might be personal, might be corporate, whatever. Okay. Most likely this is personal. Most likely I don't have a corporation here.
Okay.
Okay. So that's what you see here, this very common retirement strategy, right? So you have a personally owned UL. And you've seen this, Todd, right? You've seen exactly this thing.
Yeah, but I've structured these in holdcos as well.
Yeah, you can. Absolutely, you can.
But I didn't do the one share thing that you said.
Right, because nobody knew about it, right? It's only, I would suggest, in the last 3 or 4 years that it started to get.
Okay, I set it up before that, so.
Yeah, I think, I don't even remember when, like I said, the first time I read about it was probably a decade or so ago. But even then, nobody was doing it. Okay, So then what's happening on the other side, of course, is I have this cash surrender value, and I'm going to get that cash surrender value pushed up to my MTAR limit. So we're going to fund this thing up to my MTAR limits, okay, which we said isn't going to be that great today because of the new rules. We talked about that on Friday, but you're going to fund it up to your MTAR limits, and then you're going to just leverage that. So for example, let's say you get to age 67, you retire at age 67, just for the sake of argument. And you retire here with $100,000 of cash surrender value. Okay, well, we're probably going to do something like this. This is how I typically see this thing presented, is that let's say I'm still earning a 4% return net of fees. So I'm going to take, let's say, $6,000 of collateral loan. I'm going to go borrow that from my favorite lender. Okay, not a policy loan. So I take $6,000 of collateral loan in year 1 of retirement. And now I have this sort of quasi tax-free set of retirement income, because what happens then is I'm going to have a loan here of $6,000 plus interest. And my account value, my cash surrender value, is $104,000, right? And then you go to year 2, and in year 2, you borrow another $6,000. And then the idea here is that now your cash surrender value continues to grow. And so now you're going to have a loan of $6,000 plus 2 years of interest, sorry, $12,000 plus 2 years interest. And that's all compounded. And you're going to have your cash surrender value of $108,000. So the idea here is that there's sort of a race, right? There's a race between the two. And as long as your loan doesn't grow at a faster pace than your cash surrender value, sorry, it doesn't grow at such a fast pace that it outstrips your cash surrender value, you're okay. You can use this as a perpetual source of income. Yeah, exactly. You don't have to borrow the $6,000 every year. So you could do that in whatever, your first 10 or 15 years of retirement, and then stop borrowing, right? If you went into those slow go years, for example, you might turn the taps off, Todd, right? I'm using it to take my annual trip to Hawaii, Sean. Okay. Whatever it is, whatever thing I want to do in retirement that I need another $6,000 for. Okay. But just for whatever. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a nice, yeah, exactly. So it's exactly right. There's no OAS clawback. There's no tax to pay. Right? It's just $6,000. Okay. Yeah, exactly. I'm collateralizing my cash surrender value, Sean. That's exactly right. Yeah, so I really like this, Todd, for the physician, as Esther says, who's maxed out on RRSP and maxed out on TFSA, and we can supplement their retirement income. And that person probably does have some estate planning needs at death that require some permanent insurance. So it's a nice blend where we can use permanent insurance and build a little bit of tax diversified retirement income. Works out nicely. That's fair. I am not such a fan of this being sold as your base retirement plan. Okay. Yeah, it's not for everybody, Bev, right? It's not for everybody. That's where I say my dentist, my physician, my successful consultant, that kind of thing, right? Yeah, exactly. A good earning lawyer, Todd, because they're not all great earners, right? You get plenty of lawyers who make $70,000 or $80,000 a year, but if you've got a partner or whatever the case is, then yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, that's right. So this is where I am literally collateralizing that cash surrender value. Yeah. And that's where I say take 6,000 of collateral loan. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you have to have, exactly, Todd. You have to have enough cash to actually support this, right? I do not like setting this up. And I've seen this. I know, and I know Esther has too. I know this is what Esther's complaining about. When you've got somebody who makes $70,000 a year and their retirement plan is to put $10,000 a year into a whole life policy, okay, that makes me nervous. All right. Or a UL policy, whatever it is, UL or whole, I don't care, right? That's a huge chunk of that person's cash flow going into an investment that they probably can't sustain. And this is a great year to demonstrate that. It's a terrible year for all kinds of other things, but it's a great year for demonstrating the instability of our income. Okay. All good? So that's my very basic leverage life insurance scenario. Now, what we used to see that's a fancier version of this, so this is where we look at leverage life insurance. We're going to look at 10.8. Okay. Now, this is no longer contractually available, I will say. And there are some prohibitions on it in the Income Tax Act, but you can still do a version of this. So what we used to see up until 2014, so I don't see it as 10.10, Todd. I see it as like 4.4 or 6.6. But yeah, same type of thing. Okay, so up until 2014, you would buy an insurance policy, usually UL. Okay, and the insurer would promise you two things. So the insurer promises, first off, a rate of return. So there's going to be a guaranteed investment in here, kind of a guaranteed investment return of 8%. Okay. But they also promise a guaranteed borrowing rate of 10%. That is, you could definitely borrow money at 10%, and then you could definitely earn a return of 8%. So here's what the insurer would do. The insurer loans you $10,000, just for the sake of argument. Let's say that fits within our MTAR limits. So the insurer loans you $10,000, which you're then going to put back into the policy. Okay, or you might even invest it elsewhere. Okay, it doesn't really matter, but the insurer says, here's your $10,000, and now you're going to pay 10% interest on that, which is expensive, right? That's $1,000 of interest, but you're at a high tax rate. So let's say you're at a 45% tax rate. So your after-tax cost is only $550. Okay, this is deductible because you borrowed to invest. Everybody's with me here? Makes sense? And then you're going to put that $10,000 into the insurance contract. Okay, so you take that 10,000, you put it in the insurance contract, and you're going to earn an 8% return. However, that 8% return, that's your $800, that's tax exempt growth. So the idea here is that even though you're paying higher interest than your investment income, you're actually growing your net worth every year. Now you have to have enough cash flow to support the interest. That's the whole idea here, is that you are at a relatively high tax rate, so the tax deduction is attractive, and so that you're at a, or sorry, that you don't have a tough time maintaining that cost of borrowing. Is everybody with me, though, that really, with notwithstanding tax risk, okay, notwithstanding tax risk, you're about $250 of net worth ahead, and that amount's going to compound, right? So you have about a $250 increase in net worth, and that's relatively low risk because both your borrowing cost and your interest is deductible, or sorry, is guaranteed. I apologize. Now, here's what's not allowed anymore. So since 2014, we cannot have these two rates linked in the same contract. Okay, and if you do have the same rates linked in the same contract, then your interest is not deductible. And in a corporate setting, there's no CDA credit. So the Income Tax Act changed because the Income Tax Act said, look, people are really using insurance here to create this risk-free investment that only works because of the provisions in the Income Tax Act. So what, go ahead, Todd. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, if somebody set this up, which I didn't, what happens now regarding?
Yeah, so these had to be unwound.
Going forward.
Yeah, these old 10.8s, there was no grandfathering. When the rules changed in 2014, they all had to be unwound, or you had to have somebody who agreed to stay in the same contract and just stop borrowing under the terms of that contract. So the question was, do you actually have a universal life insurance need outside of this whole 10.8 strategy? Okay. Now, what did happen is it was replaced, and some insurers were very quick to do this. It was replaced with an alternate arrangement where we basically just delink the two things. So that now you have a UL policy with a guaranteed return, whatever that is, okay? And then separately from that, you have a lending facility available through that insurer or associated with the insurer at a guaranteed rate. And what you might do here is, for example, set your guaranteed return at whatever, prime minus 1%, and then set your guaranteed rate at prime. So you still have that spread, but you're delinking the two contracts. Okay. So you can still do this, and you still see some of it done. Very popular with farmers. I know a few folks who really made hay selling this to farmers in the 2000s. And unfortunately, then in 2014, had to unwind them. It was tough to sort of come back and explain that because a lot of those were sold without a proper look at the insurance need. Okay, that's good. All right. No, that's a different product, Esther. Indexed UL is where so I understand that argument. Indexed UL works more like, let's say, like a index linked GIC. Okay. In that case, your return on your UL is indexed to the market. It actually is very much like an index linked GIC. Okay. That's good. You can't stumble around on US Reddit without US finance Reddit without talking about indexed ULs, right? Okay. Good. Good. Yeah. Don't you actually have that on your shelf, Shauna? I thought you had not that exact product, but can't you do UL with like a GIO? Don't you have a non-variable GIO product? I don't know, honestly, Shauna. I might be wrong. I don't know the UL shelf at Cooperators very well. Okay. It's not an exciting return, Shauna, right? Remember I showed. Okay, right. Except in this case, and my return, remember I just showed my return was like prime -1, right? I didn't really care about the return. Do you see that? All I care about is that I'm getting a tax advantage on the spread between the two amounts. So you're not really investing for return there. You're investing for, you're investing for the spread, okay, for the tax benefit. Okay. Yeah, I've already done some of that. That's for sure. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at IFAs then. Now, I'm going to say that IFA has been heavily promoted by a couple of insurers, one of which might have just been mentioned in recent years. And I have my nervousness about IFA. I'm not a huge fan of it, but we're going to look at it here. And I have seen where this arrangement works. I think it can work in certain circumstances. So here's my starting point. Okay, we're going to have this as our starting point. We've done a needs analysis for a corporation. Okay, so, and we have determined that the corporation needs, and I don't care why, but the corporation needs $10 million of life insurance. Okay, everybody's with me here? So my corporation is going to have to acquire $10 million of life insurance to cover whatever risk we're talking about. All good? So what we could do, we could buy a term policy, okay? And let's say that our premiums on this term policy are going to be whatever, $40,000 a year. Okay, and we could pay that for 10 years. So you do a T10 for 10 years, and you've spent $400,000, and ideally you have nothing to show for it. Okay, is everybody with me there? Right, that's what we want with our insurance, right? We do really want nothing to show for it. Okay. So then, how about this as an alternative? As an alternative, I'm going to buy a $10 million permanent policy. Now, what's the downside to my permanent policy? much higher premiums, right? If I have a $40,000 premium on my UL or on my term, I probably have a cost of insurance here of about, well, in fact, I'm going to do cost of insurance as a YRT structure. Can I do that? And it won't be much more expensive than term then, will it, Melanie? It'd be about the same as term. It might even be a shot less for YRT, right? So we're going to do a $40,000 cost of insurance. But then, of course, what happens next year? What's my cost of insurance going to be next year? Yeah, it's going to be higher. It might be 50,000 and then maybe 62,000 and then whatever, 75,000 and so forth, right? It's going to go up every single year. Okay, those are actually a little bit large increases. Let's knock that down a shot. That's going to be about 44,000 and then about 50 and then about 49,000. That's better. And then about 55,000 and so forth, right? Okay, and we could run those quotes, but let's go with those numbers. Okay, all good? No, I know it. When I buy a UL with YRT, I know what my cost of insurance is going to be every year. The YRT schedule is available to you. So you can run, and it's all guaranteed. That's going to be guaranteed cost of insurance. Okay, because you're not repricing every year, right? So those amounts will all be known. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to max fund the policy. So let's say for the sake of argument, we have MTAR room, just because it's going to be super convenient here. We have MTAR room of $360,000. Is everybody with me there? Okay. And that might not be perfect, but I'm going to use that. It'll be useful for illustrative purposes. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. In year one, we're going to have premiums paid, and my premium paid now is broken into two components. I've got my cost of insurance is all done in the corporation. So cost of insurance is $40,000, and my investment component here is also $360,000. Okay. Now, what the insurer is going to allow me to do then, my cash surrender value is going to be $360,000. There will be no surrender charge here. The insurer underwrites this thing, assuming there will be no surrender charges. All good? And now my corporation borrows immediately, okay, and usually from a third-party lender associated with the insurer. So when this is all set up, the insurer says, this is our third-party lender. You're going to qualify for them for credit. The corporation immediately borrows $360,000. Okay, that's good. Everybody's with me here? All right. So then, what are we going to do? Well, in year two, now my cost of insurance is a little bit higher. My cost of insurance is now $44,000. And I'm going to invest $360,000. Now, where did I get that $360,000 from? Where did that come from? It did. It came from the loan. That's exactly right. So it came from the third party, came from the loan. And yeah, that's true. It's still within my MTAR limits, Melanie. Perfect. Yeah. So I'm investing up to my MTAR limit. And now, what's my cash surrender value? Yeah, and even plus a little bit, right? Melanie, it's going to be 360 times 2 plus investment gains. So let's call it 780. Is that fair? Okay, so now the corporation is going to borrow, and watch this. This is where we're going to get our gimmick here. Corporation borrows what was in there, 780 minus the 360 they borrowed last year, $380,000. Okay, is everybody with me here? So now we get to year 3. And in year 3, we're going to have cost of insurance is now $49,000. What's my 420? Didn't I do that right, Todd? Okay.
The 380 should be 420, I think.
Oh, sorry, I messed up. I didn't want to make my gain that much. Yeah, I got you. That's a pretty aggressive gain. I only wanted 740 here. That's what I want. Sorry, I apologize. Okay. And so I'm going to change that to 720. That's what I had in my head. Sorry. All right. Better? It's passive. It's all passive. This is all passive, Esther. However, it's not taxable, right? It's all happening within the life insurance policy. So it is passive income, but it's not taxable because it's all in an insurance contract. Agreed? So what's happening here is very specifically tax exempt and okay. So rewind here, Esther, right? You've lost sight of the original scenario here. Okay. Go back to the top left. Remember I said we did a needs analysis for the corporation. You with me here? Okay. The corporation needs $10 million of life insurance. That's a key person need or whatever it is, but that's not, we don't need that to invest. We just need $10 million of life insurance. Okay. Good. Okay. So everything, I'm doing this all in the insurance contract grant. No seg funds here. Everything is happening inside the insurance contract because that's how I get that tax exempt growth, right? And that's also how the insurer is willing to lend me, or the insurer's affiliated lender is willing to lend me the cash surrender value immediately. So here it's not tax deductible, Todd, but hang on to that thought. Okay. Good. We will get there. Okay, so tax exempt and there's no AAII impact here. No loss of small business deduction, which honestly, you probably don't care about anyways. If you're making this kind of money, you're probably well beyond small business deduction being material. Okay, but if you did care, it's not an impact. And I'm going to once again invest up to my MTAR limit, which should be $360,000. It should be the same amount every year for the first 8 years. So I invest $360,000 and my cash surrender value now is $360,000 times 3 plus gains. Everybody's with me there? So call it $1,100,000. No, 1,140,000, 50,000. Okay, I think that's right. Yeah, that's good. Okay. But where did the 360 come from, Rosalind? So the corporation borrowed the 380 here, and once again, it's going to use that down here. Do you see that? So Todd's onto it here, right? Do you see that then my net cash outlay in year 2, I really only had to come up with, because I borrowed 360, I had to come up with $44,000, right? And in year 3, my net cash outlay, the cash that I had to come up with is less than that. I was able to borrow 380. I only had to come up with $29,000, right? Because I borrowed the 380 from the insurer. Okay.
I'm just going to come off mute for a second because I just think that would be easier. So at year 1, basically you took out this policy, and you borrowed. So you originally put in 360,000 into the policy, and then
really 400, right? It's really 400. 40,000 of cost of insurance and
Oh, yeah.
360. Yeah.
And then yeah, okay, 3, yeah. And so then you borrowed from the third party lender another 360, and
Yeah.
then you reinvested it back into the policy.
Yeah.
And then so basically each year that's kind of what you're doing, but is that correct? So I just wanted to make sure I understand the concept, and then
Yep.
basically using some of that to pay not only for the investment, but to pay for the cost of insurance.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood it. I wasn't sure at the beginning. So
Yeah, it's a messy thing, right?
yeah, so basically you just needed to have that large lump sum kind of at the beginning to be able to originally start basically the possibilities for this.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Okay. So in year 3, the corporation now borrows the amount in excess of, right? Yeah, the interest we'll talk about in a second, Todd. It's absolutely valid here. And that's $410,000 now that the corporation borrows. And what does the corporation do with that $410,000 that it borrowed that year? Goes and reinvests it. Well, pays the premium anyways, right? So uses that to pay the year 4 premium. Go ahead.
I just have a question. So in year 1, we've got 360,000 of cash value. We're going to borrow that immediately. So in other words, 360 minus 360 is 0. Then in year 2, we're going to borrow another 360. So I'm just confused at how it's 740 minus only 360 and not 2 times 360.
Because okay. So we've only borrowed at that point 360, right? We borrowed 360 in pink in year 1.
Yep.
So in year 2, now you're up to 740 of cash value. So
yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Okay.
So just, yeah, so you can watch the cumulative loan balance if you want, and maybe I could have made a column for that. Cumulative, sorry, loan balance. Now, ignoring interest here, and Todd will get interest in a second here, but at this point, you have borrowed 360, right?
Mm-hmm.
In year 1.
Yep.
And then you add 380 to that. So that brings you to 740, right? And then in year 3, you borrow another 410. And that brings you to 1,150,000. Okay.
Yep. I'm still wrapping my head around it. Thank you.
It is difficult. Honestly, there is nothing simple about this. So Carla, we're still capped at 360 because of our MTAR limit. Okay. So I still can only invest 360 because I have to respect the MTAR limit.
Why did you say in year 4, you're using the borrowed money now to pay the cost of insurance and the rest gets invested?
That's what I did every other year, right?
So in year 2, if you borrowed 360 and you invest 360, that 360 is used also to pay for the cost of insurance.
Right.
Okay.
Just that I wasn't far enough along. But do you see what's happening here? So I borrowed 380. Honestly, I borrowed 380 because I could, Ksenia. Okay. I'm going to every year borrow as much as I possibly can. Good. Because that's financial planning, Ksenia, right? To always borrow as much as you possibly can. Okay. Good. Hang on to that loan balance thing, Sean. We'll get to that. All right. So then in year 4, my net cash outlay, you see this, is only, I have $415,000 versus a $400,000 loan. My net cash outlay is only $5,000. The idea here is that because the investment is growing and growing and growing and growing, that's good. And I typically want a fairly conservative investment mix here. The amount that I can borrow is eventually going to be enough to actually pay the entire cost of insurance. Now, it's an absolutely valid point that I have interest to pay here. Okay, so there's going to be interest to pay here, and then there's interest to pay here. And there's interest to pay here. So your corporation has to be able to fund those interest expenses. All good? But you've collateralized a portion of your policy. Agreed? Some of your policy is collateralized now. And what do we get to do when we collateralize a portion of our policy? I get to deduct some interest, Alicia, right? So this is partially offset by being able to so I can deduct that interest. So I partially offset that. So same deal, Todd, right? You would always do the math here. You're going to take the lesser of NCPI and cost of insurance, which is going to be very close to each other. And you would say, if I've got a $10 million death benefit, right? A $10 million death benefit, and if it's a face plus contract, in the early years, almost none of it is collateralized. But by the time I get out to year 8, 9, 10, then a massive portion of that policy is collateralized. Okay. So you would have to do the math every single year to figure out what that portion is. Okay. In year 1, I've only collateralized $360,000 out of a $10,360,000 policy, right? So about 4%. And I paid a $40,000, that's my NCPI. That's going to be about right for NCPI. So early on, I cannot deduct very much of it, right? But exactly, I'm building that amount that I can tax deduct as I get deeper into this. So Bev, the formula here, your net cash outlay in year 2, for example, if we look at year 2, I want a color that I didn't use in there. The net cash outlay, that's based on my cost of insurance plus my investment portion minus the loan, right? Minus the borrowed amount from year 1. Are you with me there, Bev? Okay. So Sean, I'm going to give this policy so that there's going to be a collateral assignment to the lender, right? Okay. So I make that collateral assignment to the lender. which means the lender has first claim against my death benefit. And then when I do that, then I can deduct a portion of my premiums, right? And the portion of the premium I can deduct is based on how much of the insurance I need, which is small in the early years, right? You agree with that, Sean? So year one, I only need $360,000 of insurance. But you see, by year three, I need $1,150,000 of insurance. So proportionately, that amount is increasing every year. You with me there? And then how much I can deduct is based on the lesser of your net cost of pure insurance or your premiums paid. Because it's a YRT policy, those are essentially the same thing. Yeah, exactly, Sean. Yeah. So, and you are always collateralizing that larger amount. So when I get to year three here, I've collateralized $1,150,000 of that policy's value. Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it, Rosalind? You would not expect YRT to work out like this, but this is what I had commented on last time, that if you're willing to take the risk and the risk works out well, YRT does work nicely. Okay. That's good. Yes, I had to really, Esther, I had to crank a ton of cash into this thing, right? Okay. Yeah, that's exactly it, Rosalind. So when I die, if I die in year three, the lender takes their $1,150,000. Okay, they take that right off the top. The other thing that happens though is I would have that much CDA credit. So you die in year three, there's going to be a 11,150,000 of death benefit. That's right. Okay. You're going to lose about $1,150,000 to pay off the loan. Okay. And you're going to have a CDA credit based on $11,150,000 minus the ACB. So normally you're right, Alicia. Okay. And I had mentioned that on the last slide, right? You're basing that on what I showed on the last slide. That's what makes this contract exceptional. Okay. This contract is sold under an IFA or similar agreement. It depends what insurer you're dealing with. Everybody has a similar name for it. Okay. Yeah, still CDA at the end, Esther, right? Okay. So yeah, that's the whole sort of conceit here, Alicia, is that there's some lender who's going to lend you more than what you would expect. Okay. All right. That's good. Okay. And I will just point out, okay, that there's nothing that I showed on this page except being able to borrow your full account value or your full cash surrender value that's new, okay? Everything else on here is something we have already done. So I was paying the interest every year, Shade, okay? I paid the interest every year. Do you see in green where I say I'm paying the interest? Good, I'm not capitalizing the interest on this loan. Okay, that's good. I could capitalize the interest. I don't, maybe you could find some math that supports that. I don't like it. I would prefer to pay it. Okay. They provide an approved line of credit. Yeah, so this is a good point, Grant, right? There are many versions of this. Okay, there are many versions of this. I showed, and maybe nobody believes me here, but I showed the simplest version of this. Okay, and then yeah, you can add all kinds of complexity here. Okay. Good. Okay. Now, yeah, it looks good, doesn't it? The numbers look good. I would point out, just as an overall comment, okay, that this is the same with any leverage, right? Find me any leverage strategy where you're borrowing 360,000, 380,000, 410,000, and just map it out. And they're all going to look great, aren't they? Okay. But I have to be willing to, I have to have that $400,000, Rosalind. That's exactly right. There's investment risk here, Todd. If the markets tank in year 2, no matter how safe, quote unquote, my investment was, there's some risk there.
Never mind in 2 years, you mean today.
Right. So whatever time, honestly, it's worse though, if I'm deeper into the policy, right? It's worse in year 2 or year 3 or year 4 than it is in year 1. Yeah, exactly. Something like that could hit me at the wrong time and really hurt. Okay. You have to have enough cash flow in your business that the deductibility is actually useful. Okay. So this type of thing can work out well. And if everything lines up perfectly, it will. But there's a lot of risk here. Okay, so there's no, Grant, there's no approval for leverage here. There's nothing that I have to do in terms, like there's no mutual fund component to this. There's no MFDA component. So outside of whatever rules my own compliance department has, there's no requirement to get approval for leverage. And because it's done within a corporation and not personally, it's generally not as tight that way. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's what happens. Okay. Yes, you're probably counting on that insurance for some other need, Esther, right? Okay. Yeah, that's fair, Grant. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I do not mind it there, Esther. If I've got somebody who's making so much money that they really do have a $10 million insurance need and they can afford the $400,000 a year without any sort of concerns, I'm fine with that. Okay, go for it. Because you're not exposing that person to risk that way. I just ran into one of these where it's a radiologist. Okay, radiologists make good money. Okay, and he is pulling in about $700,000 a year. Okay, so into his Prof Corp, and his Prof Corp was sold one of these with $450,000 of annual premium, actually almost identical to what I have on the board here. So $450,000 of cash outlay required. Now, I get that that cost is going to disappear, but that's 60% of his after-tax cash flow going into an insurance policy. That does not excite me. That kind of thing, I think, man, we were thinking about commissions there. Where's Stephen with commissions? Okay. All right. There. Sorry, I beat you to the punch, Stephen. I think Andrew picked it up for you last time, though, when you were gone. I think Andrew gave us the commission's answer. All right. All good? Okay. So Sean, you could have somebody who's presented with this scenario like this, and you could be asked to assess the risks for it. Okay. And that's where you would want to talk about market returns. You would want to talk about the ability to continue deducting as much income as you need to deduct here. You could talk about cash flow to support that cost of insurance year after year. You could talk about the lender changing the conditions for their loans. Okay. You could talk about what happens if you ever want to sell the business that owns this thing. Okay, are we all good? All right.
Jason, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
It's not about this. I know it's about before. I'm going to go back and watch it. But so before our break, you were talking about, setting up a share. So when you're going to the bank to borrow money, in that case, you were putting up the share that owns the insurance, not the insurance contract itself, correct?
True. Now here, the corporation owns the insurance entirely. There's no insurance share here. Hang on to that thought for a second, though. Okay.
So what do you mean in the other scenario? That's if there's like multiple owners. If there's only one owner, then it shouldn't matter, right?
Well, hang on to that thought, Todd. We're gonna do a little bit more work here in a moment, which I think will.
Yeah, I'll listen because there's lots to learn here.
So, and by the way, Dave that we talked about earlier, Dave Larkins, whose name you reminded me of, he knows this stuff cold. He's really good at this. Okay. No, you wouldn't, Stephen, set this up in an opco unless you're dealing with a medical professional who maybe can't have a holdco. Okay. And Esther, it's a good question. I know a fair number of people that have done at least a few of these. Okay. Now, I don't like them when the numbers are so large that you're piling on the risk. I like them as a small portion of your overall retirement plan or overall net worth. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do some erasing here, and I'm going to now juice this thing up a little bit. Okay. Because right now it's not that exciting, right? We can make this more exciting, can't we? Okay, this time I'm going to take Todd's suggestion and run with it. And instead of having the corporation do the borrowing, my shareholder is going to have an insurance share. Or a transfer share or a maintenance share. And it allows the cash surrender value to be personally collateralized. Okay. So now, instead of my corporation doing the borrowing, now my shareholder does the borrowing. Okay. And now my shareholder does the borrowing. And now my shareholder does the borrowing. Okay. And when the shareholder borrows that money, they are now going to turn around Yeah, they know this stuff, Todd. Your insurance folks all know this stuff. We're going to just add a little bit of a step in here. I'm going to mix this up a little bit.
Yeah, he knew about the share thing, so.
Okay, yeah, that I'm interested to hear what they say about it. So now my shareholder loans that money back to the corporation. Okay, and the corporation now uses it to pay the next year's premium. Okay, so now when my shareholder loans that money to the corporation, any interest paid on the loan is deductible, because now you borrowed that money to invest. The shareholder borrowed the $360,000 to invest in the corporation, and that makes the interest on that $360,000 deductible.
Where would that interest rate come from? Because he's borrowing basically from himself.
Nope, he's borrowing from the third-party lender, right? The shareholder is still borrowing from National Bank Financial or Equitable Bank or whatever.
Okay, so he's not taking it out of like the holdco or whatever. Okay.
Right, he borrows still from the third-party lender, just using the cash surrender value on the policy as collateral. Okay.
And the policy could be in a holdco at this time or personal.
Yes. Yeah. No, this policy is in a corporation.
So in the holdco. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So do you see what happens here is now first year that interest is not that exciting, right? But by the third year, here you've got this $1.5 million loan. Okay. And you're paying interest at whatever it is, let's say 3% interest. Well, now you've created a fairly significant tax deduction. So now I'm doing personal borrowing, Rosalind. In the last example, the corporation did the borrowing. This time I have the shareholder doing the borrowing. Right, although you could do it that way, Esther. I have seen that version of this strategy. That's actually closer to what Grant had talked about a minute ago. Okay. All right. So here we have a $34,500 tax deduction. Now push that out another 10 years. Okay. Push it out to year 10. And you're going to have about $100,000 a year of tax deduction. Okay. And growing. So you actually can get into a situation where the tax deduction gets so large that you can't even use it anymore. Good. And that's actually a risk with this thing. The risk is that you sort of hype it up too much, you build it up too much, and we get a tax deduction beyond any reasonable ability to use that tax deduction.
What does the tax deduction go against, Jason?
Just your income. So whatever income you're generating that year.
Personally or all in the corporation or?
This shareholder borrowed the money, right?
Right.
So the shareholder is taking the deduction.
So you could basically get to a point where you're not paying any income tax on your own income.
And in fact, when you see these strategies illustrated out to year 15 and 20, that's what you're going to see.
So this is what Donald Trump must do because he doesn't pay any taxes.
It's the kind of thing you would see in those tax brackets. Yeah.
That's what he does.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, I understand that, Esther. And there is some risk here. This is a strategy that has some tax risk because there's a question here about whether I was really taking investment risk by lending money back to my corporation. Okay. You would never, ever do this without discussing it with the client's accountant and probably a tax lawyer as well. Okay, that's good. Nice, Betty. All right. Okay. All good?
So Jason, the biggest thing I guess here is that by doing this on the right, the individual basically gets to write that interest loan off. When you do it just on the corporation, then what happens on the left?
You just don't get to write off the interest.
So you're better off doing it on the right, and then you get to write off the interest against your income.
However, you're adding that risk, right? So you're adding risk here in the sense that this might be deemed a shareholder benefit. So this is kind of Ben's question here. So I don't even know, Ben, if we actually need to change the Income Tax Act to make this offside. Okay. I can see a 15.2 argument here where we come back in, or sorry, 15.1 argument where we say, okay, I call BS on your $10 million life insurance need. Show me how that's going to happen. Okay. If you die today, where does your corporation need that? So that's the first thing, is I think that we can make that argument and say, really, the only reason you did this was to create the shareholder benefits.
But if you have tons of holdings and real estate and stuff, then $10 million of permanent insurance, that's realistic for an estate plan for the
So
very
it could
wealthy.
be, although then hang on a second though, if it's for your estate plan, I'm going to make the same argument, Todd, right? If it's only for your estate plan, that's not a corporate need, that's your personal need.
Okay, but it could be in the corporation that the need is. So
But it's, you see, I'd have to show that there's actually a need there, right?
well, you couldn't write it if there wasn't a need, because an insurance company would say state the need.
Yeah, that's pretty dicey, honestly. I've never seen an insurer come back on a corporate policy like this and say, we're not satisfied with your needs analysis.
Well, son, you got to have proof. So
You got to prove that you did honestly, write one of these at Sun. As long as the corporation has money to pay premiums on it, they will underwrite the policy. Okay. Yeah, once you get, so Alicia, I agree with you on up to about $2 million of insurance. I totally buy that formula. Once you break through that $2 million of life insurance mark, you get into a whole different type of financial underwriting. Okay. All right. Now, I'm going to show one more thing here. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely in rarefied air when you start to do that kind of stuff, Alicia. Okay. So now let's say that I did not have the insurance share. There was no insurance share in place. Okay, so I never bothered to set up the insurance share, never got around to it, didn't start with it, but I still want to do this. And I had mentioned this before. This is where the shareholder will pay the corporation, okay? The shareholder will pay the corporation a guarantor's fee. And this is quite common, actually. You'll see a lot of this. The insurance share is hardly ever done. This is by far the more common arrangement when we're trying to do what I just showed. Now, because in Canada, we have no guarantors businesses, we don't know what a bona fide guarantor's fee is. So there's no reasonable way to assess this. And because of that, we end up kind of on the fly. So a typical rule of thumb here, and I've mentioned this before, is 1% of the amount borrowed. And I think that's probably good, but again, I have no idea. I think you would need a tax lawyer to tell you that. Okay, so I'm going to refer to a case here called Golini. We had a case go to the Federal Court of Appeal, okay, which is the appeals court for Tax Court of Canada. And in Golini, we had one of these arrangements. We had an IFA arrangement. Hey, and just for the sake of making it more interesting, it was an offshore insurance policy, just like we talked about last week. Okay. And in this case, the shareholder paid a weird sort of present value calculation as their guarantor fee, and the court overturned it. The court said, no, we don't like that arrangement. Okay, the court said that's not enough guarantor fee. We don't think it's reasonable in the circumstances. And basically, as a result, they undid all the deductions and hit Mr. Golini, who was now dead. He was dead when this went to court, with shareholder benefits based on the amounts he had taken out of the corporation. Or all the amounts he had taken away from the insurance contract. Okay. And if you're ever going to do one of these, then what you will do is you'll get the Golini case. Everybody who does one of these knows it. You'll get the Golini case and you'll take it to the client's accountant and lawyer. You'll have them read it before you ever set foot on this path. That's good. So Grant, back to your comment about your specialist sending you here and having some advice about it. I would make sure in that scenario that everybody has read Golini, because it is full of warnings about how these things can go wrong. All right, that's good. Okay, any questions here about IFAs? It's enough, isn't it, Todd? And again, honestly, we have just scratched the surface, okay, of the IFA. I have given you the simplest versions of this.
See, we need to learn stuff like this because when we get licensed as, certified CFP people, then we need to be able to go out in the workforce and present this to people. So
that
we really need this.
I wish that what you're saying were exactly right, but the reality is you can sell this with, now in BC you can't. In BC you have to have 2 years under your belt, but in Alberta, I could go and get my LLQP tomorrow, assuming I would pass the exam, and I could be selling this in in December. Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem. It's just understanding how it all works, like
Right. My point is that I would love it if it were only people who have CFP certification who are doing this, but that's not what happens.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah. And in fact, if you read the Golini case, Todd, very specifically, the insurance agent in that case made part of his argument in court, and you can see what he's trying to do. He's setting himself up for an E&O claim, but he very specifically says in court, I am not a financial planner. I am not a tax guy. I am only an insurance agent. I only know insurance. Okay. Good.
Jason, if you wrote the LLQP, they would say you cheated because you would probably get 100%.
I don't know. It's always questions. We always mess up reading questions or whatever the case is. So, okay. I'm actually not allowed to write the LLQP. I'm not permitted. So not even a big deal. All right. We did retirement planning with life insurance. All right. Let's go back to family law. We'll do a little introduction on family law, and then we'll move into our harder stuff with family law. Okay. We'll do this, then we'll take lunch, then we'll go into the more challenging stuff. So are there any insurance questions before we move into this? All right, so I'm going to use the same picture that I used back in chapter 6. We're going to draw out our relationships here. All right, spoiler alert, I guess. So I have a couple. That's also true, Esther. All right, I have a couple. Both are 18. They don't know each other yet, but we'll keep them the same age just because it makes everything easy. So they meet and they enter into a relationship when both are 25. Okay, So at 25, they meet and they enter into a relationship. However, they don't get married. They have a period of cohabitation. So how would we define their relationship during that period of cohabitation? So they're going to be common law during that time. That's exactly right. Here we would consider them to be common law partners. Okay, now your common law definitions vary by province, but it's generally either 2 or 3 years to be determined to be common law. I would point out that, of course, Alberta has adult independent partners. Okay, and you'll see a chart in Chapter 5 that defines common law for every province. So you can scroll through that chart. We'll have a look at it after lunch, but it shows common law for every province. And yeah, exactly, Shauna. So you're not common law until you hit that mark, unless in some provinces you can go and register your relationship ahead of that 24 or 36 month or 2 or 3 year mark. But yeah, they are not common law until they hit that mark. In some cases, we accelerate that by raising children together. So you can have different rules there for having kids. And of course, that leads us to another discussion because we get different definitions for income tax and Canada Pension Plan. And that's where you see 12 months, right? That's 12 months of raising a child together. Typically with group benefits, and we talked about this before, group benefits is going to be usually 90 days, but it can be shorter or longer, depending on the contract. Okay. Pensions, again, are going to have a different definition. Okay. That's good. All right. So then at some point, they're going to formally tie the knot, and that's where they get married. And getting married is just a legal recognition of the fact of your marriage. And this firms up a bunch of different things. So this gives us now a firm look at the fact that you are married, and this becomes clearer now for a bunch of different things. It becomes clearer for property rights at the end of the marriage. It becomes clearer for pension assets, how we deal with pension assets. There's a bunch of stuff that gets a little bit easier. Estate outcomes, there's a bunch of estate outcomes that get easier here. Okay. And I am generally not a fan of sort of long-term common law relationships. I think people don't realize how much risk they are putting themselves at by staying in common law relationships for extended periods of time. I know sometimes people do it because they don't think that it's whatever a good idea to get married because they know that there's more stuff that they might have to give up if that relationship ends. But I think what they're missing is that there's an argument that they could end up giving up really a highly uncertain amount of stuff at the end of a common law relationship. So that leads to the next stage here, which is, of course, when that relationship ends. So the relationship ends, we're going to have a period of separation here. And that's when you're no longer in a relationship. And whether you're separated or not, yeah, it's tough, Grant, right? You think you're not married, right? in a common law relationship. But instead, what you really are is kind of married. And then it's going to be most inconvenient trying to figure out in what matters you were married and in what matters you weren't. Okay. It's a question of fact whether you are separated or not. That is, we would have to look at the relationship and see what's going on there. And on the basis of a bunch of yes or no questions, we would say separated or not. Okay, that's all good. And then, and this is exactly the same argument I'm going to make here, at some point following your breakdown of your marriage, that's where we would say, now you're divorced. So divorced is much the same as married, a legal recognition of the end of the relationship. Okay, that's good. And for the most part, following divorce, there's very little stuff that you still have to deal with in terms of the ongoing relationship. Okay, and again, just like I prefer that people get married when they are in long-term relationships, I prefer that people get divorced and firm things up when they're in a long-term separation. Okay, and I think that's reasonable advice to give to a client. Has anybody ever actually told a client to either get married or get divorced? Yeah, and you don't want to come right out and say it that way, Todd, right? I wouldn't say, hey, dummy, you put a ring on that finger, right? You can't do that. But how about this, Todd? How about giving somebody advice that while they remain in a common law relationship, there's a lot of uncertainty there. And that as common law partners, they may not have some of the rights that married people have. And determining those rights might require that they go to court. So I agree with you, Todd, that we shouldn't tell people to get married or divorced. That's not appropriate. But counseling somebody on the risks of living common law, I would suggest, is particularly difficult. Okay. Okay. Like he told them to get married, Grant? Is that what you mean? I don't know if I understand this story, Grant. I'm curious now. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But it does. It creates more certainty. All right. Yeah. And then if they hadn't got, so did they separate soon after retirement? Was that the deal? Oh, I see. Interesting. Yeah, there was a time when that was more relevant for income splitting. Now we're generally okay. Common law or married are generally the same under the Income Tax Act. It's more in provincial legislation that we get problems. Yeah. Okay. Can we break there for lunch?
Jason, can I ask you one question quick?
Yeah. So, in just 1 second, Todd. Yeah, that Grant, the death, that is a case where it matters, dead or not, or sorry, married or not, is a big difference. So yeah, that's a tragic thing, but that's where married is a much better outcome. Go ahead, Todd. Sorry.
So if you get married outside of Canada,
Yep.
and you're legally married, you still have to register that with the Canadian authorities to say that you're married. Or if you do your taxes and you say on your taxes you're married, is that good enough?
No, and in fact, what'll happen is then if you come to Canada as a married couple, you'll declare then that you're married, right?
Well, what do you mean declared? You mean on your taxes?
No, but your taxes have nothing to do with that.
Okay, so I went away with Kim. We got married in the Dominican Republic. We have a wedding certificate for there, but we never registered it here in Canada.
So I don't know exactly how marriage law works in that regard, but there's not a place where you have to register that foreign marriage here.
Kim says, if you say you're married on your taxes, you're married.
I agree with that for tax purposes, but I don't agree with that for that's okay. So that would be a fact that would come to bear if we had a couple where we didn't know if they were married or not, and it becomes a question. And they've been declaring that, and both of them have been on their tax return for 5 or 6 years, declaring that they're married. That would be material. But I wouldn't say that's the only thing that matters.
The only thing I was told when we did get married that you have to register here in BC with the marriage certificate that we have saying that we're married, but we never did do that. We just said we're married. And
We have a spousal RSP. I mean,
Yeah, but spousal RSP you can do if you're common law.
you can do that if you're common law, honey. That doesn't mean anyway, it's okay. I'll let everyone go for lunch. Go for lunch.
Yeah, there's no relationship between what CRA thinks you are and what your provincial government thinks you are.
Jason, we could sit down and talk for 2 weeks and we'd never run out of stuff to talk about. So
No, that's right.
I better go for lunch.
All right. That's true, Stephen. All right.
Okay. Have a good
Okay.
lunch.
We'll all be witnesses in Todd's divorce case. I don't know. All right. Okay. So let's take a break there. I've got 46 minutes past. I'm going to do the same here. We're going to break for lunch here. No, in fact, I'm not. I'm going to keep the meeting running because it's not going to matter tonight. We'll take a 45-minute break and we'll resume at 31 past. So you can stay or not. It doesn't matter. Okay, we'll see you back after lunch. Thanks.